Bonjour, Jessica Gidiga Kuntz Indigenous. Hello, my name is Jessica Gidiga Kuntz Smith. I am a Two-Spirit band member of the Boys for Band of Minnesota Chippewa Tribe. I would just like to say Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. It is an honor to be able to do this for you today. And I'd just like to start off by giving a trigger warning. Some of this is difficult content involving sexual violence, physical violence, and murder. Um, the title of this is A Survivor's View on Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. I am a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And human trafficking and domestic violence are two of the leading causes of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Missing and murdered Indigenous people is not something that is new. This is an epidemic that has been plaguing Indigenous people since colonization. So it is really important that we are having this conversation on Indigenous Peoples Day, because Indigenous Peoples Day, as we all know, used to be recognized and is still recognized in many areas as Columbus Day. And Christopher Columbus was one of our first traffickers and murderers of Indigenous people. As we all know, the story, Disney story of Pocahontas. And I talk about this because there are not very many people who know the true story of Pocahontas and the atrocities that this person had to go through as a young girl. Pocahontas was a real person, and she was a child when she was taken by colonizers. She was taken from her tribe and she was brought over to an, another world, as they call it in the movie. And she was forced to marry, and ultimately she was killed. And this is something that not a lot of people know about. And Pocahontas was actually one of our first documented missing and murdered Indigenous people. So I'd like to start off with that by just giving a little bit of background knowledge on that misconception that a lot of people have, that Pocahontas is just a Disney character, when that is completely 100% untrue. She was a real girl who was kidnapped and trafficked across the world and then ultimately killed. So I started to do work within missing and murdered Indigenous people through a independent study. And through that independent study and research, I started realizing that the things that I had personally gone through in my life are direct correlations with the underlying reasons of why so many people are going missing and getting murdered. And human trafficking is something that also has very many misconceptions around it. A lot of people do think that, you know, people are kidnapped out of their homes, or, they're walking down the street in a store and somebody grabs them, which can happen. But most of the time, the majority of the time, trafficking happens with someone that we know and love. And that is why it's so hard to stop it, because we build relationships with people, and ultimately they turn to betray us and use our bodies for reasons that we never consented to. And through my story with human trafficking, I was groomed on Facebook by a man in Las Vegas who, at that time, I was very vulnerable. I was using alcohol. I had just lost my dad. I was going through a huge mental health crisis, and I was extremely vulnerable. And I fell for all of these lies and deceptions that this man had said to me, that, if I flew out to Las Vegas, that he would make things so much better for my life, and We talked for like about 6 months, and I was starting to fall for this person. I fell for all of his lies and deceit, and I went out there. And as soon as I got there, I had realized what a lie it was to get me out there. I went through a lot of abuse in that situation. I put myself um, out in some very dangerous situations that I very well couldn't have made it home if it wasn't for my mother who had got me out of that situation. And I talk about this because I think it's important for people to know that there are so many traps out there, and it is so important to be crucially vigilant when it comes to red flags on internet. And I really highly um, disapprove of online relationships for this reason, because I personally know that there are traffickers out there who are seeking to abuse vulnerable people. And with missing and murdered Indigenous people, because of colonization, Native people are at a much higher rate for being trafficked, for being murdered, for being sexually assaulted. 1 in 3 Native women has experienced sexual violence in their lifetime. And to me, those numbers are extremely disheartening and extremely scary, because, I have so many family members who I really want to protect from these things. And that is why I do this work. Um, so a couple of little background things that also make missing and murdered Indigenous people a problem that is really hard to solve. And much of that comes from jurisdiction and federal laws that are in place that do not protect Indigenous people. But now we recently got the Violence Against Women Act passed, which is a full Olympian fix, which really gives jurisdiction back to tribes, for tribes to be able to prosecute non-natives who come onto their lands and commit crimes against their people. Prior to this passing, a non-native person could come onto any reservation and abuse anybody and pretty much get away with it, which is why we had such a huge issue with our missing and murdered and violence in Indian country, because people knew that they could come on to the reservations, commit crime, and then go off reservation and not get charged for it. Jurisdiction is a big problem. And even with this Violence Against Women Act, tribes still have to opt in. They have to have their courts system and set up to be able to prosecute people. And 2016, the FBI only prosecuted a third of the sexual assault on tribal land and less than half of the murders on tribal land. So we have systems in place that are supposed to be protecting people, and they're not. And that is a huge reason of why I do the work that I do as an advocate for families of missing and murdered Indigenous people, because I have the legal background knowledge and I have the lived experience knowledge as well, which both of those are really important to being a good advocate. But I also believe that anybody can be an advocate. You do not have to have lived experience. You just have to have compassion and a heart and a willingness to learn and a willingness to walk beside families who are going through these atrocities with a caring heart and an open mind, because a lot of these things that you will hear from families are really hard to believe if you do not understand where they're coming from. I will say that I represent one family who his case is a prime example of the police negligence that happens with our missing and murdered every day. Their family went to 3 different law enforcement agencies for help in looking for their missing son, and not a single law enforcement agency helped them. We are in Superior, Wisconsin at UWS, and the Superior, Wisconsin police told his family, bring us a body and we'll open a case. That is what our law enforcement professionals treat our families. Bring us a body and we'll open a case. This is something that happens all across the country in every jurisdiction, and in every city we see injustices, and we see our people being treated like we are nothing, being treated like we don't deserve to get justice. And currently there are well over 5,000 active missing cases of Indigenous people, and there are not very many organizations in law enforcement that are actively working to solve this. And I'm currently working for a task force that is comprised of different community members and some law enforcement, there's some FBI and some tribal leaders. And the task force is really set to get laws in place and legislation, and to have a state response plan so that we can start finding solutions to the problems that our people are facing. Many of these problems stem from a lack of money, a lack of funding for families, a lack of funding for searches. Many families have to do searches on their own because they are not getting the help from law enforcement. And we are working in different capacities to try to stop that. Minnesota actually was the first state to open a permanent office for missing and murdered Indigenous people. And we are hoping to see that office truly help our families, because I work with these families every day and I see the pain that they have to carry every single day. And it is something that, unless you have been there or walked with somebody who have been there, you can never truly understand that pain. And the reason why I say this, and the reason why I'm doing this, is to bring more awareness to these issues, to hopefully have more people who are willing to jump up and support families when they are needing support. I have done several rallies for justice and have asked for people to come out and show up and support these families. And while there has been a good amount of people at my rallies, I feel as though there should be so much more support for these families. And especially now, in a time where we are seeing such a racially driven response to policing, it's not getting any better. It's only getting worse for people of color. And that includes Indigenous people, that includes our African American people, and anybody who is a person of color that is experienced bias by police. They can't even get the help that they deserve and the help that they desperately need. So there are so many changes that needs to be done in order to actually make a difference in this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. There are so many different ways that people can get involved in the MMIW movement. MMIWR, I say that because it's not just our women that go missing. It is also our men. It is our girls, our boys, and our Two-Spirit people. I am a Two-Spirit person. A Two-Spirit person is a non-binary LGBTQ It's kind of an umbrella term. It means different for different people, but for me, it just means that I have a masculine and a feminine spirit. And it is a more of a traditional and spiritual identity than it is a sexual identity. And that is also a common misconception about two-spirit people. As you can see, this is a topic that makes me very emotional. I'm very passionate about change in this topic and this epidemic because these are things that I have gone through. These are things that I walk with families every day in the fight for justice. And I see the true atrocities that our government puts upon our people and does really the bare minimum to try and help solve it. So I'm asking you, if you are going into law enforcement or if you are going into any type of law, even in the medical field or social services, all of these fields play a huge part in missing and murdered Indigenous people, especially the foster care system. I could do an hour-long talk on this very easily because there are so many different branches of reasons and whys and how this happens. And the foster care system is a huge problem. So if you are going into social services, please understand that Native children are taken away from their homes at more disproportionate rates than anybody else. And this has been something that is happening since the boarding school era. We believe that CPS is just a modern day boarding school because they take our children away and then our children are prone to abuse. They are exploited in the foster care system. When somebody goes missing in the foster care system, nobody looks for them. Nobody looks for them. If you leave here today with one thing in your mind and heart from this conversation, I would ask for that to be compassion and empathy and a longing to want to do more to help. There are so many families who could help just needing awareness, sharing posters online if you've seen them, sharing stories, sharing GoFundMes because families do not have the funds to do searches on their own. There's so much that people can do to help, and they may seem little things like sharing or donating to a GoFundMe, but these are little things that really build up and can make a huge difference for these families who are searching for answers and fighting for justice. If you have any questions or you want to get involved, please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email in the description of this, and I will have my website that you can go to find my contact information as well. You know, I'm a UWS student. I just graduated from UWS, and I am head first into this biggest issue that we have in our country. And it is because I have compassion, because I've been there. I have gone through these things, and I have the compassion and the heart to want to fight for change. And I beg and plead that anybody who is watching this to want to get involved as well, because this is not something that we can do alone. These are systems that need to be changed from within, and these are systems that need to be changed by laws and by fighting for change, fighting for legislation to get passed, and also having people in these fields that know and understand the issue is systemic. It truly is systemic. And there are so many things that need to change in all of these systems to better protect Native women, children, boys, men, and two-spirit people. And you can be that change if you truly want to be. Chimigwich. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.